Hello, I'm Alex Colvin, Dean of the ILR School here at Cornell University. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's keynote webinar, Supply Chain in Chaos, What's Ahead? I'm really pleased to welcome two fantastic guests we've got with us today. First up, Anne Patricia Sutanto, who is based in Jakarta, who's the CEO of PT Pan Brothers Tbk, which is Indonesia's largest garment manufacturer, supplying numerous global brands, and has approximately 34,000 employees across 25 factories in Indonesia. A really large workforce and very important. Thank you for joining us, Anne. She's active in many industry organizations, including the Indonesian Textile Association, where she serves as its vice chairman of international relations and foreign trade. She's also on the advisory board of the ILR School's New Conversations project, which is focused on sustainable labor practices in global supply chains. And very familiar with Cornell. She's actually a Cornell parent. Her daughter graduated from the university last year, so a real pleasure to have as part of the Cornell family.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Alex, for introductions.
Yeah. Thanks, Anne. And our other guest is Duncan Scott, who's Senior Vice President, Strategic Sourcing and Quality for New Balance athletic shoes, one of the world's leading brands in the area. And full disclosure, I'm a 30 to 40 mile a week on New Balance shoe runner myself, so very proud to be wearing those. Based in Boston, Duncan's held global leadership roles in footwear and apparel sourcing and manufacturing in Korea, Taiwan, China, Brazil, Hong Kong, and he was country manager for China for Reebok and head of global footwear sourcing for Adidas before joining New Balance in 2010. He's active in corporate social responsibility roles across his career. And he's also a 1981 graduate of Cornell, where he was a member of the men's track and field team. Thanks for joining us, Duncan, today.
Pleasure to be here and good to be involved in a Cornell event again. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Just want to note for all our viewers that this event is being recorded and it'll be viewable at the same URL after the event. So if you want to go back and review things, you'll be able to do that. You can also submit questions in the chat, which you can open by clicking on that dialog box at the top right of your video player. So please do that. And we'll also be asking you for your feedback via some poll questions at several times during the broadcast. So please stay tuned for that and respond to those questions. Throughout the discussion, we will also be sharing URLs and resources in the chat as well, so keep a heads up for those. And if you are watching the archived recording, those links are available in the overview section, which is just below. So today we're talking about global supply chains and the chaos they've been thrown into. We really have seen that in recent years. We've certainly seen that just the last couple of months with the war in Ukraine and its impacts. We've seen that across the pandemic and with the impacts of climate change. I think things like the Evergreen ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal brought, I think, to the fore for many of us something that I think we kind of took for granted, that we get these products from around the world right to our doorstep, and we don't really think a lot about how they get there. But I think that will force us to think a little bit that these supply chains can be disrupted. We've seen seaborne traffic jams off Los Angeles. I was there a couple of weeks ago. You see the ships sitting out there waiting to get into the port. And there's no easy answer to some of these problems. They're complex issues. These are complex things that we rely on. We're going to stick up a polling question for our listeners and viewers, because I know some of you have organizations yourself that are dependent on global supply chains. And we're just curious, on a scale of 1 to 5, low to high, how much are supply chain disruptions impacting your organization currently? So curious to see what you're experiencing in your own organizations. As we think about that, we'll give you the results in a few secs. We're seeing pretty high disruption effects already coming in as our poll comes in. We also want to think about the extent of global supply chains. They really are a kind of worldwide phenomenon. So here we go. I'm seeing lots of people experiencing high disruptions to their supply chains. Let's take a look at a map of the world. Here's a slide that was produced by our New Conversations project that kind of illustrates the global nature of supply chains that's a different slide there. Yeah, we'll move it forward to the world map slide. So here's here's sort of an attempt to illustrate the different countries around the world where we're seeing contributions to global supply chains. And we really see that kind of heat map across the world where it really stretches from the Americas to Asia to North Africa, the Middle East. There's countries around the world connected together through global supply chains. And it's something that forces us to be aware of things going on across the world and how they may affect us in our own local communities, how they affect our the cultural fabric of our lives. Just to give one really concrete example that's kind of close to home one for me, on Monday, we're going to have 30,000 runners racing in the Boston Marathon. Most of them are going to be wearing shoes manufactured across that global supply chain. I have here my handy New Balance 880s that I run in. The typical runner that races is going to be wearing something like this. And it's produced, it could be produced anywhere in the world across this global supply chain. Duncan, I'm really curious to hear from you. What challenges, what can you tell us about the challenges that New Balance has faced over the last couple of years dealing with these disruptions to global supply chains?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Alex. And the 880 is one of our iconic products, and it was very challenged. We were producing that in South Vietnam, and we had almost a 3-month shutdown at one point in South Vietnam that really affected it. Fortunately, we do have multiple source locations for that product, and we were able to shift production to Anne's country in Indonesia, among other areas. But we did not have an easy way out of it. We essentially had to spread out our production and concentrate it. We had more sources, and then we had a shorter period of time to produce those. I think that if you look at the logistics challenges that really came out of the pandemic, it was really a kind of a whiplash effect. We had initially what was really a small supply issue from China, and then that was followed by retail shutting down and causing a big demand problem and a cash flow problem. So we had to kind of slow down our orders. And then there was, again, a huge rebound in orders as people switched to online. And during the pandemic being shut in, especially for athletic products, there was a big demand for people to, go jogging or do home workouts and things like that. So there you had this huge whiplash effect, and that's been our biggest challenge. What's come out of that, I think the supply to a large extent has stabilized. We've seen the producing countries come out of the most serious effects of the pandemic, but logistics has really been impacted, and this whiplash effect has created a set of bottlenecks that you mentioned, with ships waiting and ports overloaded globally, and a lack of equipment. And we think that that's going to take us all the way through 2024 at least. To give you some idea what we're facing, it can take 2 to 4 weeks to actually book a space on a ship after our products are completed, where it used to take just a few days. And the backlogs in the port and the time that it takes us to move the product, it adds between, let's say, 20 and 45 days of transit time between the key source countries in Asia and the key markets in Europe and in North America. So as you can imagine, that kind of has wrought havoc with deliveries that are tied to seasonal product launches. Costs have soared. So the cost for containers moving from Asia to the West Coast went from about $1,700 to almost $22,000. So, more than a factor of 10. Air freight went from $8 a pair to more than $35 a pair, making it kind of cost prohibitive in some cases. So these have been massive challenges. I think we are adjusting to that and planning better and changing our calendars. But these have been some of the really significant challenges that we have been facing and are currently facing.
Those timeframes that you're mentioning there, I mean, I think that, from a consumer perspective, those would be kind of shocking timeframes, right? Because we've got into this culture on the consumer side of everything just in time. You sort of go for prime delivery and you expect it there in a day or two, right? The idea that something could be delayed 20, 40 days,
Yeah.
right? It seems shocking from a consumer's perspective. How do you adapt to that kind of consumer demand pressure, the just-in-time expectations that consumers have?
Yeah, well, that has been challenging. And again, I think inventory levels have been low. So what we've been trying to do is build up those inventory levels. Eventually, they will recover. But in the short run, we've had to adjust our calendars. So in some cases, from a marketing perspective, that means moving a little bit further away from the market to make product decisions earlier. And then that allows us to get products and materials and components moving through the pipeline faster. Essentially, there's a lot of modularity in the business, means we're converting materials into different products. If we can defer that and do it later in the process, then we can still deliver on time to the market. Clearly, in many cases in our industry, we are making to stock. So when we make to stock, it's these lead times are sort of built in. We built in a lot of it. But under these circumstances, as I said, we need to take time out of the development process to accelerate that. We need to concentrate the production process, as I said, by making products over, let's say, a wider range of suppliers, but also doing it in a concentrated area, take time out of the production space, which is costly, but it can be done. And then finally, we can use other methods when it comes to working quick to market. We have customization programs. We do have factories closer to the market. So for example, we have our own factories in the UK and 5 factories in the US, which we're very proud of. And we do customization there for products, anything from pleated products to running to lifestyle. And we've been able to utilize those factories pretty well to meet some of the needs for specialized products and for really fashionable products that need to be delivered in real time.
Yeah, something you said early on, I was thinking, struck me the idea of moving the production from Vietnam due to the supply chain disruptions there and shifting production to Indonesia, and then what that must involve to increase production there. I want to turn to Anne and ask you, and sort of somebody who's on the other that end of starting the supply chain, right? How things have been impacted in your space, and thinking about the impact on supply chain workers in Indonesia and in the organization. How has this been affecting your end of the supply chain?
Okay, so I think the last 2 years has given us a lot of dynamics, like what Duncan has mentioned. We have to be able to adapt to any changes because each of the country has different regulations, rules, lockdown situations, how we actually adapt to the health protocol. So in Indonesia, in a way, we are quite lucky because the government are open for business to communicate. And, the resilience that the government gave the industry to actually adapt to this protocol is quite good in a way. It's not as if it has no challenges, not at all. It has huge challenges. But we told the government, if we have a lockdown, who's going to feed all these people, right? Because we are a labor intensive manufacturing still, especially on the apparel and shoes, right? So we told the government, look, we know exactly how it's going to, especially during 2020, where we have no vaccine, right? We have not had any vaccine. But we told the government, look, let's do this. Each of us would need to be responsible with our workers. We have to adhere to the shift because of social space, distance. And then we also need to wear masks, clean up very regularly. And we have to actually check not just the temperature, but symptoms of COVID. Because back then in 2020, no vaccine, everyone is still have a micro, no one knows about this, right? How to handle the illnesses and comorbid and what's not. But thank God the government listened. We got very deep closures on how we have to actually update to the government every day and digital. Yeah, they actually be very, very quick on that. And we are able to have zero lockdown in 2020. And when the government imposed on vaccine, we are able to actually persuade our people to actually have the vaccine on hand and use that to actually make more security. And not just the workers, but also the family of the workers. Because this pandemic is actually more like a massive infections, right? It's not only coming from the factory side, it can come from the family side. So I think that the world are being taught a lesson. And I think if we hold hands together, with the supply chain, with the brands, we are here, right? Duncan, we are here.
Yeah.
I mean, you can still smile. I can still smile. I mean, it's not as if it's easy. I'm not saying that, but I think with the right control, with the right empathy, with the right communications, transparency, and we have a constant communication with our brands, with our workers, with our government, with everyone within the stakeholders, every day, like 24/7. We might not be on the floor, but we are in constantly digital. We are doing a lot of Zoom. Like now. I mean, early in the morning, like 6 a.m. Jakarta, up to even 24:00 midnight. So it's very hectic, but we are happy that we can control that. Out of our workers, Pan Brothers, we have about 34,000 workers. I know it's not good, but we have a fatality rate of 8 people. 6 of them pass away during the non-vaccine era. 2 of that actually refusing to have vaccinations, and they have comorbid. So it's not something that, but it's not as easy as it looks. 8 people pass away is not really good, but it's minimal compared to the what do you call it, the statistic.
By global standards, that's pretty good. Yeah.
I think
it is.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's really been striking to us over the last couple of years is the essentiality of workers in certain jobs. You think obviously the healthcare workers, but grocery store workers, garbage workers, things that we often take for granted that had to keep doing their jobs in person during a period when some jobs could be done remotely. And it's trying to think about when we purchase apparel, footwear, to kind of remember that to make that somebody had to work in a factory. And that's a challenging environment to protect the workers against COVID, and you get those kind of challenges that you're facing.
Yeah, and during that time, actually, because we cannot work from home, we, the leader, have to be there in the floor as well. And a lot of people ask me, "Are you not afraid of this disease?" I said, "I think with a lot of protocol, we should be able to take care of ourselves, because the challenge is if we are not there in the floor, why should our workers there in the floor?" So we have to use the example method. And I told everyone, we just cannot work from home. We have to be there. After the vaccinations is the other way around. Actually, I work from home more because I have a lot of discussions with a lot of people. But then when it happens in 2020 as well as in early 2021, especially during Delta, we have to be in the floor to actually make sure that everything is in orderly. Yeah, I think I'm glad that I don't have comorbid. Actually, I got Omicron in the US, but I'm fine now.
That's good. I think what Anne mentions there is the collaboration between the government and the brands and the factories has been tremendous. And again, without workers, we don't have anything. So it's been, I think the trickiest part of it was really starting with saying when the demand dried up, that was the biggest challenge, because how do you keep the factories going, make sure people don't lose their jobs, in addition to having COVID worries. And it was very difficult, because if retailers are shut and they can't pay the brands for product, and if the brands therefore have no cash flow to keep money going to the factory, it's really challenging. So I think everybody did their part to kind of chip in, keep the orders flowing. And then, these relationships between the brands and the factories often, and I know in Anne's case with some pretty big customers with Adidas and Nike and others. Some of these go 30 or 40 years. So although there's that separation, there's a collaboration, which is critically important and helped get people through. The vaccination rates in these factories are typically far higher than the typical average because the brands are promoting it, and these leading factories are really promoting that. So again, it helped people get through. It helped educate people, and by extension, the families. So it's been important. We also a lot of the brands together worked to try to lobby the US government to try to provide vaccinations, because the vaccination rates also are relevant to if the factories can't work and production isn't flowing into the US, that also affects a lot of retail jobs in the US and brand jobs in the US. So it's not only workers in another country that need to be taken care of. If they're unable to work, it also affects our economy as well. And the U.S. government responded. Yeah,
it was really striking. The reports out of the auto industry in particular, where there was this sort of overshooting of reducing down kind of production, and then this bottleneck kind of comes up when they try to realize that the consumer demand is back, and they have to pick things up again. And if you sort of shut down facilities and workers on layoffs, it turns out to be a real bottleneck to bring that up. And I don't know if that is the same thing plays out in sort of apparel and footwear as well, but that's been a really striking thing in terms of the impact on closing down, like versus trying to maintain production through the crisis.
Yeah, very much so.
Yes, and just to give you an idea on Indonesia, I think we have one of the best vaccination rate in overall. And for example, in Penn Brothers cases, up to now, we have booster already. We have our third vaccinations, and we have 99% already. So it's as good, Indonesia, I think the government has done a very decisive move, I call it, to actually import a lot of vaccines, and also U.S. government, and also a lot of aid. Also, we have all the vaccinations, like we have Sinovac, we have Sinopharm, we have Pfizer, we have Moderna, we have AstraZeneca, we have Johnson and Johnson. So we have everything here. And the good news is the people actually believe also in this vaccine. So it's not hard to convince them to actually have this. And the government has been very promotive, and they allow actually private sectors like us to help, not just on the factory level, but to the community, so that the spread of the infections are lessened and minimalized. And that's the reason why we have this appreciations to the government, and the government also appreciates the help of the private sectors. And like what Duncan has mentioned, actually this pandemic teach us a lot of lesson on how the stakeholders of the supply chain should behave within the humanity era that we have, right? There's a lot of misunderstanding about our supply chain, but this pandemic actually shows that when we have our stakeholders in their heart into the whole supply chain, we can actually make do, regardless how difficult, Duncan has mentioned about logistics, about lead time, about lockdown here and there. But, when we actually can move around very fast, I can imagine, Duncan, what you have had, with the lockdown out of Vietnam, and move some of the parts to other countries, including your facility in US and other parts of the world. It's tremendous effort, how to move around within the logistic difficultiness. Yeah. And that can only happen with teamwork, I guess, among all the stakeholders, including how to handle this pandemic. I think that's the beauty, right? There's always the beast on our supply chain, but the beauty is this COVID actually teach us a lot of lessons how to do a really good thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we are glad there is this COVID. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I think sometimes humans need to be packed down that we are so mortal, right? That we need each other. Yeah. Wherever you are, Duncan, wherever we are. Here
very true. Very true.
Yeah, it just made me think of one of the results that we've been seeing in the research that our New Conversations project research has been finding, and that's that there are actually fewer factories and fewer countries producing apparel. I think we've got a slide on this. This is slide 3 from the New Conversations project. We just pull that up for a sec, but essentially it's showing that something like 80% of world apparel is produced in 10 countries. Very kind of. It's Indonesia, it's Vietnam, it's China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, but it's a limited set of countries and limited set of factories that have the capability to do this. As a brand, how do you? Here we go. So we can see this sort of dominance, and it's both on the left is apparel, and I believe on the right is footwear, and it's the major countries. A little variation country to country. I believe Bangladesh, for example, is more apparel. Pakistan is more footwear. But it's a narrow set of countries, the same countries that you're going to the same kind of well. How does that matter for you as a brand, Duncan, in terms of you're dealing with this particular set of factories and countries that you're working with?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, I think a diversified portfolio of suppliers, which includes diversifying across multiple countries, is really important. The heavy concentration that you're seeing now is partly a reflection of globalization that started with China joining the World Trade Organization was a major impetus, and then the removal of quota systems that really dominated the industry early. So that opened things up to competition. And then what you saw was China, of course, rapidly moved forward and other countries followed. So it became dominant in Asia. And for a long time, the model was low-cost labor countries sending their products to the developed economies of Europe and the US. So in the process, what started to happen with the economies going well and with products being less expensive for these very labor-intensive items, the entire business grew. So if you look in particularly at branded athletic apparel and also branded athletic footwear, the industry is much bigger than it was, and infrastructure to create those products has also grown tremendously in Asia. The barriers to wearing kind of athletic products, you can look at the pandemic as a recent example with people working from home, but really much more broadly over the last 10 or 15 years, it's become much more common to wear sports shoes around for lifestyle or casual wear. So all of those things have created a much bigger business than when we were producing in Europe or the US. And the infrastructure, meaning the technology for creating synthetic materials, both for soles and for wicking fabrics and lightweight fabrics, has all of that has grown in Asia. So it is heavily concentrated. Now you have the Asia markets rising. So China, if you look at disposable income in China and India, it's rapidly, the growth is greatly outpacing the developed Western economies, and it's creating this huge vortex and focus and concentration of power in terms of manufacturing power, manufacturing innovation, supply chain, economies of scale. So that's created that. And I think that, now that we're looking at the logistics challenges, the obvious question is, are we going to have reshoring or onshoring? Is it going to get more spread out? And the answer is that in my view, there isn't any kind of natural reason for that to happen on a large scale. Again, size really matters. So this concentration of industries and support industries in Asia, it's going to be hard to shift that in any meaningful way quickly. It would take years, if not decades, for that infrastructure to grow. Now, the nearshoring and onshoring does have value. And again, you cited earlier, Alex, the whole idea about saying, well, what about, I need it tomorrow, I need it customized, and you need to be close to market. I think that there's an element of the industry where that is true. And for that sort of more fashion-oriented product in particular, you will see some onshoring, you will see some reshoring. But the only way that speed's really going to work is if you have unique products, because an element of fashion is getting something unique, getting something unusual, and the infrastructure for producing those materials quickly and getting to the market quickly typically doesn't exist in the Western world. And if you say it's only 10% of the market, there's not a lot of scale there to encourage people to invest in, let's say, in Europe, in Latin America, or the US in that. So I think you're going to see some products where you can go quick to market, where cost is less of an issue and speed is absolutely imperative. But for the most part, I think you're going to still see it concentrated either, kind of in or near China or in or near India as we move forward. So there's still going to be a heavy concentration.
Yeah. So Anne, kind of your perspective in this world, how do you kind of, as a business leader in Indonesia, with your business, how do you think about yourself in this kind of global competition to be the kind of sources in the global supply chain? What's kind of the case that you make to both the brands, I guess, and then the investors in your company to say, this is where they should be, sourcing from. Right? How do you deal with that?
Okay, so Alex, actually, that's a very, very good question, because it's not. So my role in Indonesia is not just only in Pan Brothers, but I'm actually the vice chairwoman for Association of Textile and Garment. I'm also happen to be a very active member of Indonesia Chamber of Commerce. And a lot of people ask, so how you are going to collaborate with the rest of the world versus, these odd competitions, right? But I do believe that every country has strength, right? Including Indonesia. So I keep saying to everyone, look, we are 270 million. We have 270 million populations, very diverse. And our ranking to supply to the world on apparel is only 12. We should be able to do more. But we need to build our ecosystem. And to build our ecosystem, we have to be investment friendly. But the government of Indonesia right now has shown the Indonesia Chamber of Commerce, and we have liaised that we are prepared to do that. To prepare to do that means that we have to make sure that we have to handhold all the investment here, plus whatever it is, the expansions out of Indonesians and out of the foreign investors coming in here. But we are ready to do that because we would like to embrace also the rest of the the ASEAN, the Southeast Asia, as well as the ASEAN countries, if they want to invest to Indonesia. And that's actually the reason why I'm planning to go to US, Canada, and actually run the world trip, because Indonesia this year is the host of G20. And as the Indonesia Chamber of Commerce on B20, we have to show our gracefulness as well as our way to do collaboration. I just met with Bangladesh 3 weeks ago, and then also with India and Taiwan and China per se. So I said, let's do collaborations like what we have done during the pandemic. But I do believe that the strong lead time should happen soon rather than not. And competitiveness, I think it's good for everyone, including, of course, the brands and the whole stakeholders, because it keeps our edge, right? And the world deserve our edge too. It's not as easy as it looks, but hey, we are in the industry where challenge is always happening. But what we would like to say to the world is like this: have compassion with us, on the apparel and footwear. Because we are also being challenged in a lot of ways for our the welfare of our workers, for the way we behave on, for example, our ESG, which is carbon net zero, circular economy. we got challenges from our bankers, our financials. Every time we have huge inventory because of logistic. It's not as if we don't want to have reductions, but like what Duncan had mentioned, we also want to have compassion with our brands if they have to book a very huge amount of containers where the rate is so ridiculously high. We also want to hold their inventory if they don't need it, but the inventory looks huge. So the compassion and understanding about the industry is what we need. And we are not talking only about Indonesia, because during the pandemic, actually, we have a lot of Zoom call with the rest of the Asian producers, because some of them have some difficulties with their brand. So we actually ask ILO as well, we ask Better Work, we ask a lot of people to reach out. Hey, we are in this together. We understand this is a pandemic, but just give also a compassion on the supply chain side. We are quite lucky, Pan Brothers, because like Duncan has mentioned, we have huge relationship with all the strategic brands, and the brands are really indeed a very, very good brands. I cannot name the brands, this is not a marketing tools, but you can check our website, who I'm talking about. So all the brands are really, really committed. And in the past, I always being asked by investors, by everyone, right? So how stickiness your relationship as an OEM with the brands? I think the pandemic has shown that's how sticky we are, right? The relationship. And, rather than talk, the actions has spoken louder. But what we ask out of the world, out of the industry, has compassion. We are still human. We have a lot of mistakes, but we are trying very hard to make sure that what we have produced out of Indonesia, out of this end of the world, where democracy are being constitutionalized, are something that is indeed from our heart. Yeah, I keep saying to everyone that, this is the passions that make the industry alive, regardless, how many stone has been thrown out of us. I have to say like this, because this industry has been misunderstood. But I say to everyone, yes, you are on Zoom, but you still need clothes, right? You still need shoes, apparently, right? So you still need us, the industry, to actually produce. I'm sure, Alex, you still wear your clothes. You are not on virtual clothes, right? Including me, including you, Duncan. I bet you
Absolutely.
also wear your shoes, right?
I have them here somewhere. So these are the new ones.
Yeah.
So
I keep saying to everyone, regardless, during the pandemic, everyone said, Anna, who's going to wear clothes? I said, you are. You are still wearing clothes. So I just want to shout to the world that, look, we are still human. We are not innocent, right? But please have compassion with us. We really work very passionately with the brands, with our suppliers, with the whole stakeholders, with our workers. And I'm actually honored to work alongside our workers who work compassionately and relentlessly to make sure that the goods are being delivered on time, despite, all these challenges. Yeah.
I think that, raises really some question, that is coming through the chat already for you, Duncan, and that's, on the brand perspective, how do you respond to exactly those kind of questions of having the right partners, the partners who meet the ESG, principles that you want to follow? Yes, sure. The labor principles, but also sort of locations. Some countries, democracies, others less so. Yep. And how do you, as a brand, deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, speaking from a personal view, I'm pretty involved in a lot of the industry initiatives to make sure that we have safe and healthy working conditions and that we are applying ESG principles. And again, I'm very proud to say that New Balance is a company that really has very, very strong opinions and fundamental principles that we work with. And as someone who's really in charge of selecting our suppliers and developing those suppliers, first and foremost, if you look at our sourcing guidelines, the number one thing that we say is that we're looking for partners with shared values. And we try to choose partners that that are closely aligned with our goals for ESG, and then develop from there together and work together. As Anne pointed out there, this is a learning process. And the question a lot of times is not, are we where we want to be today, but the question is, are we moving at an acceptable rate of change together to get where we need to be and where we know we need to be? And I think that as a general statement, I think we are. I think sustainability is a huge challenge for the globe. And I think we have to think about that. If there's anything that could change it, one of the obvious things again is as we look at the logistics problems and you think about oil prices affecting transport, and then you start asking the questions about what effect on the world economy does it have when we're shipping these products halfway around the globe. And the answer is it's super complicated about looking at how we can be a more responsible industry. I think a lot of that concentration of industry gives us the opportunity to, for example, change the way we power our plants. So more and more of our plants are setting goals and achieving goals for solar power, for wind power, for water power. And then the same thing with materials. We're using materials that are more environmentally friendly. We're using manufacturing techniques that are more environmentally friendly. And I think, again, as an industry, we need to ask ourselves, are we moving fast enough? I would say that globally we aren't, but I also would extend that to saying that the world is not moving fast enough to try to achieve the environmental goals. It's really challenging. But I think that there is a really strong dedication to doing that. So clearly, any brand that's operating today that wants to meet the needs of their consumers and also be a responsible world citizen is taking these things into account and doing the best that we can. But it is an area that needs a very strong sense of urgency, and it needs that collaboration across governments. I was in Indonesia, government and industry and brand, and I don't think any one entity, any one sector can drive this on their own. So sometimes the industry comes under criticism where they say the brands aren't doing enough. But I also think that the brands can do a lot and should do a lot. But I also think you need the cooperation of governments. And Indonesia is a really interesting area. I'm a huge promoter of Indonesia. I think that they've got a huge role to play. But at the same time, this is an industry that, for example, they have a lot of coal exports. And when you talk to the government officials there, they say it's not only an Indonesia problem, it's a world problem because the world needs coal. We want to be responsible, but if you take coal out of our economy, we're really going to struggle. So can you help us in a collaborative way move off coal? And it's a complex problem with 270 million people.
Yeah, the other thing, that's really clear is thinking about the impacts of climate change in terms of which populations are being negatively affected by the consequences. And we had some interesting research that in your Conversations project did on this. We've got a slide, if you could pull up the slide about S is for sea level is the title on it. And it's a mapping of the impact on apparel and footwear manufacturing sites based on the projected sea level rise by 2030 in Dhaka, Guangzhou, and Ho Chi Minh City.
Yep.
And those are, key. Here we go. These are key production areas, and those sort of little blue and red dots are illustrating areas that are likely to be affected by sea level rise and also production areas in this industry. So those are people's, livelihoods going to be affected. Their home, they live by, the production areas. Their homes and their factories are going to be affected. So clearly, this is going to have a big impact on this industry. And from sort of your perspective, how do you think about the risks and the potential impacts of climate change, and what do you see in this area?
Okay, so maybe you any one of you have heard what our President Jokowi has mentioned. I think last year during the G20 handover from Italy to him, and then in Davos, right? So Indonesia ourselves, we are focusing our 100 years independence in 2045, right? So on our sectors, on this carbon net zero, we have our scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Right now, for Pan Brothers ourselves, we have declared that by 2030, we will have carbon net zero scope 1. And then scope 2, we want to have a pathway of 2035. And we hope by 2045, where Indonesia actually celebrate our 100 years Independence Day, we can actually promote the scope 3 as well. So that's our statement. And it's not about, people ask me, is it what the brands want and what's, no, I said, this is the responsibility of a company with the largest manufacturing in apparel in Indonesia to actually pull forces also to our peers that, hey, we actually can do this if we actually put our mind into it. I mean, there are a lot of challenges, but yes, the challenges can be actually managed if we can actually manage. So at this moment, for example, we actually have our solar panel energized all of our factories, and by 2023, we will finish all of the factories, the 25 factories that we have, fully utilizing the solar on the daylight. On the evening light, we are promoting to the government so that we actually can export our electricity, store it with the government, and can import back so that we actually can have the electricity back during the night, right? And what about the waste, right? Because waste is always key for all of this, right? Mm-hmm. So for the factory waste right now, we are doing recycling, and we will put that as our uniform because we are able to manage mechanically recycle our waste. And then we actually promote this to all the multinational companies in Indonesia to actually uniformize their team with this recycled material out of our waste, the solid waste. And there are a lot of other things that we are actually focusing on how to improve this. And we actually ask our brands, all of our brands, if we can start, 1 or 2 lines doing a circular economy. I know it's not easy, because circular economy means, after sales, also how about, the retailers that have stocks. So we are looking at all angles, how we can actually do this with economy, with competitiveness, and it all comes back to the sustainability of the economy as well. We are focusing on this because we believe we can. Looking at what we have done together during the pandemic, I'm sure we can do this together. Yeah, it needs a lot of upscaling. It needs a lot of understanding and on how to do this without burdening more economics into the chain, right? So we are looking at this not as ourselves, but we are looking at this as a collaborations with even the supplier side, so that we actually can bring everyone up to our level. So we call that a responsibility out of Indonesians factory and Indonesians company, where our president has said in the world floor, and we would like to actually show to the world that we can, with all of the help of the stakeholders. Yeah, but I believe we can. Yeah, I mean, there's no impossibility on that. Yeah, but we just have to put our mind and our heart into it. Yeah. And we have to make sure that it's also economic scale and also sustainable in terms of economy as well. We cannot just talking about sustainability in terms of the planet and also the people, but we have to be sustainable also in terms of profit, right? So we work around that planet, people, and profit details. Yeah.
I think it's such a daunting challenge for the world that at times it's easy to kind of slip into despair. That could we actually make any difference on it? So I think the perspective that you were sharing, that we have to think of these concrete steps we can take, right, to make some progress, or otherwise we just continue on the path in despair. Nothing will change. I'm gonna want to pull up a question from the chat that we've gotten. This is sort of picking up on the economic topic of the day, which is inflation, and asking what are you seeing in terms of how inflation is affecting the global supply chain? So, what are each of you seeing in terms of inflation impacts? Duncan, do you want to go first on that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think certainly we are expecting that that's going to affect demand because obviously people have less disposable income, so they're going to have a harder time purchasing products. I see a lot of these things from my own industry's perspective. Certainly, we see material prices going up, and we cannot pass all of those costs on to our consumers, so that puts a squeeze on profits. But the whole nature of the work that we do, especially in sourcing and operations, is trying to find ways to mitigate ever rising costs. Again, as long as I was in Asia for almost 30 years, working on factory floors and working in production. And there's a lot of running room for increasing efficiency to offset rising material costs, for example, and the inflation on that side. Because we have extreme inflation right now, it's particularly hard. But I also think that there are ways to try to offset that to a degree. What I also think is that the industry is a little bit unusual. We're a little bit different from the car industry, or if you want to look at things like real estate. During a time of economic hardship, people say, I can't afford to put a new roof on my house, or maybe I can't afford to buy a new house or a new car. But if they say, well, maybe I'm going to buy myself some athletic shoes, or I'm going to invest in my health, to invest in a new tracksuit or a new training tights, they're going to do that. So our industry, if you're an investor, is quite an interesting one, because a lot of times in times of economic hardship, our industry counterintuitively does quite well. Obviously, if it's extreme, that may not hold true in all cases, but as a general rule, it's sometimes we defy gravity in that respect a little bit.
Yeah. Sort of like that famous was the lipstick index that lipstick
Right.
sales go up during economic downturns. It's an indicator of recessions.
Yeah,
and what are you seeing in terms of the impact on your business with inflation, and how's it playing out? Yeah.
Actually, inflation has been our challenges every year. Yeah, being labor intensive, definitely there's always increase of wages and so on, and we have to expect that. So Industry 4.0, automation, digitalization is the key. It's not about reducing number of people. People are confused with, are you going to reduce? No, we never even reduce, but we want to make sure that the learning curve, every time we change the style, the learning curve is what make the cost, right? So we try to digitalize the movement of our good process, and then make sure that we can replicate that very fast. So the lack of understanding on all the workers are less. So we actually can have the output first. We call it right first time, RFT, Duncan. is actually
with that, yes.
there. It's actually
it's
there.
Critical.
And then, it's very critical for us to have less waste, less redo. We have to change all the habits that we have in the past because of inflations. So learning curve, and then right first time, and then also making sure that less waste are being produced is the key. And all of that, we can only do it with automation and digitalization. Why? Because the data that has been accumulated makes us actually make the right decisions and make our workers actually have confidence the way they actually process and assemble the goods right first time. And that makes all the difference, and that actually can compensate the inflations. I mean, it's not as easy as I'm saying. It takes a lot of hard work, behind the scene. But I think that's the key, right? We have to actually reduce the waste or the excessive fatness that we have because of that learning curve.
I'd just like to add to what Anne's saying, if I may, which is that, the potential for a Lean Six Sigma and Industry 4.0. The great thing about it is that the roadmap is there from other industries. You can look at the car industry and the electronics industry and what they've already done, and it's kind of a no-brainer to say if we apply half of what they've done, we can offset a lot of these costs. And again, don't misunderstand me, it's not easy. And again, Ann said the same thing, it's not easy, but the roadmap is clearly there. We know what we have to do. If we can execute it, we can offset a lot of these costs. And again, this is kind of forever, because you have to ask the question again, what about wages? What about living wages and ever growing? The world is only so big, and you have big countries there, Indonesia, as I said, very large country, China, standard of living rising, standard of living in India. So the days of low cost labor production for developed economies are gone. Basically, you're going to be nearshoring and onshoring in China and India for those industries, and people have to be able to make decent wages. The only way they can do that is through these types of efficiencies, but they can absolutely do it. So it's a big challenge ahead of us, but it's very clear what we need to do.
I think that's a great point about breaking down the kind of the impact of rising prices, right? I mean, if it's rising oil prices, I think that's clearly a negative, and you want to reduce down. But if it's ends workers getting higher wages because they're more productive because we find better technological solutions, right? That's a price we should be happy to pay, I think, ultimately.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we're running up to the end of our time, so I do want to finish by thanking our guests today, and Duncan. Really appreciate all the comments you've shared. We are going to put up a feedback poll for the audience members about the benefits this keynote provided you. So please rate us on a 1 to 5. We want to be customer responsive, like I'm sure both Ann and Duncan are in terms of their businesses. We want to do that too. So please do rate us on the keynote 1 to 5. But I do want to thank them both for really insightful comments. I think it's been a great discussion. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. And remember, you can access this URL if you want to go back and review some stuff. It's going to be up at this URL, and you can go back and check things out. But thanks again. Real pleasure talking with you both today.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to everybody out there.